GOP presidential candidate Nikki Haley has accused potential rival Governor Ron DeSantis of parroting Trump on Ukraine, saying, quote, President Trump is right when he says Governor DeSantis is copying him, first in his style, then on entitlement reform, and now on Ukraine. I have a different style than President Trump, and while I agree with him on most policies, I do not on those. Republicans deserve a choice, not an echo.
Haley broke with both men in response to Fox News' Tucker Carlson's questionnaire, writing that U.S. support for the war-torn country is actually vital. In a statement released Tuesday, Haley wrote, quote, America is far better off with a Ukrainian victory than a Russian victory, including avoiding a wider war. If Russia wins, there is no reason to believe it will stop at Ukraine. And if Russia wins, then its closest allies, China and Iran, will become more aggressive. Ooh, what a needle she's trying to thread there.
A needle, again, I've said this before on the show, and it's true, she has no constituency within the Republican Party. There's no one clamoring for this. The Republican Party, their position is pretty clear. The base is skeptical of permanent, forever aid to Ukraine. That is not to say that people are not sympathetic to Ukraine or that, like, Russia winning the war would be good. Like, in a vacuum, if you had to choose Ukraine wins or Russia wins, we all want Ukraine to win. The question is the U.S. obligated to fund this to the end of time with lives on the line? And should there also be a push for diplomacy that resolves the situation in a way that it's a stalemate or it's a co-win and co-loss, because Ukraine doesn't get everything they want, Russia doesn't get everything that they want, and we move on from this. But I guess she's right that DeSantis is mirroring what Trump has said. Again, what Trump's approach to this issue is, in all foreign policy issues and really all issues, period, is very confused and inconsistent. So I think it's more the case that not so much DeSantis is copying Trump in his views on Ukraine, but he is giving the base what it wants. He is correctly perceiving what Republican primary voters want, and he is echoing that stance. Nikki Haley is not echoing that stance. Maybe she's counting on there being enough Republican primary voters who are still neoconservatives. Again, I think she's running to be president of the wrong party.
So, okay, let's be a little more specific, I think, about what the national tone is, because I think that we can overstate in our own kind of political bubble over here in the independent media how the average American is feeling about Ukraine. While it is absolutely true that support for providing assistance to Ukraine has fallen from last year to this year, it's still 48% of Americans that support sending weapons to Ukraine. Now, that's down from 60% in May of last year. Now, it's a little bit less than half the country, but there still is a constituency that at very least wants to provide some support. And maybe that's qualified. Maybe that's saying, I don't want it to be an endless war. Maybe it's saying, I don't want there to be long-range missiles that have the potential of escalating a direct conflict between the U.S. or at least U.S. weapons and Russia. That all is fine and good. But I think there is a significant sentiment among a lot of Americans that they don't just want to leave Ukrainians high and dry. Sure. They deserve to be able to defend themselves, and that we want to support them in response to Russia's violation of international law and borders.
Probe them a little bit more deeply. Say, I'm sure many Americans, maybe most Americans, would support defensive weapons that keep Russia out of Kyiv or out of conquering the whole country and overthrowing its current government. Sure, that seems like a bad thing that we should try to avert. But again, what's the goal of the war? Is the goal of our effort to topple the Putin regime?
Yeah.
I mean, ask people that. Should we should we continue to arm Ukraine until Putin's regime falls?
Yeah.
I wonder how many people would signal that that's their view.
So that's an interesting lane that Nikki Haley is not precluded from these statements that she's making right now. Yeah. And I wonder about this with a number of other candidates, too. Is it possible for people to make that pitch that, yes, they support Ukraine, but not indefinitely? There should be, limits on how much funding goes to Ukraine, especially given the various domestic crises that Americans are going through. Is it possible? Like right now, the war has been framed as a kind of mutually exclusive. Oh, Biden goes to Ukraine, but it doesn't go to East Palestine. Money goes to Ukraine, but it doesn't go to East Palestine. When, of course, that's not really how it works. Biden could go to both. Money could go to both. The same way that we're printing money to fund the Ukraine war, America could print money to cover other kind of crises domestically, just like it always manages to come up with money to bail out banks, et cetera. I mean, these are all policy choices that the government is making that aren't contingent on each other. So it is also possible for a politician to be able to capitalize on some of the frustration that there isn't more domestic spending and more attention being paid to what Americans are going through, at the same time that they offer some considered limited support for the people of Ukraine.
Well, the New York Times reports that Republican hawks are angry with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis for splitting with the GOP establishment on the Russia-Ukraine conflict and endorsing isolationist policies. Yeah, your typical. I saw Bill Kristol was very upset about this kind of perpetual neocon bulwark conservative. The bulwark conservatives are very upset, but again, they have no constituency. And that's fine. If you agree with them, that they think their views are correct, that's fine. But that's just not where the Republican Party is. The people who view that, who think that way, are Democratic talking heads on cable news. That is the voice that Nikki Haley is representing here. And this is why I've not spoken very highly of her presidential aspirations. It's not because I particularly bear her any ill will. She's an eloquent speaker. I think she was a good governor. She's done some things I like. But I think she is committed to a previous, more hawkish version of the Republican Party, a version that is not. Maybe it's the distant future of the Republican Party, but right now it's very much the past.
And you also seem not to be very bullish about her vice presidential chances. It seems to me that she's running for vice president here, the way she's very cautiously signaling that she, has a lot in common with Donald Trump.
I guess why wouldn't they pick a VP who, if we're just literally just checking boxes here and that we're doing identity politics.
Are you gonna agree with me that maybe Carrie Lake is a black woman? My secret theory.
Whoa, are we allowed to express that?
This is a theory that's out there on the internet.
Put a disclaimer at this one. Look, I think there are candidates that are going to check boxes who look good and sound good on TV, who have a more fundamental agreement with the trajectory of the.
Regardless of her.
Or Tim Scott, or Kristi Noem, or whoever. I don't know if that's true of Nikki Haley.
But isn't the argument that some of the more Trumpy candidates who have more closely aligned with his views were electoral failures in midterms, have been really struggling with audiences, and that people were essentially excited about Trump being more moderate in appearance. He's not on Twitter anymore. And someone like Nikki Haley, who is a tested electoral quantity, someone who has actually run a state and is a responsible adult in the room, very much in her prime.
People's VP picks are wild. Mike Pence didn't diversify the ticket at all. It seems like he was picked because he was one of the few kind of more establishment
influence. And isn't that what Nikki
Well, he was
Haley
someone
is?
who could do that and could stand Trump. He obviously didn't diversify the ticket in terms of. There's another white male.
No, but he got the evangelical
vote. He wasn't regionally important. Trump had the evangelical vote. There was no one who wanted to vote more for Trump than evangelicals.
The point of Mike Pence was the idea that Donald Trump is a businessman and reality TV star that no one was really sure if he knows how to actually run a country. And so here's Mike Pence. He's a grown-up, and he's going to be there. Don't worry about it. He can Dick Cheney this if push comes to shove. Now, I think that people underestimated Trump and how much independence he was going to have and how much kind of ownership of the office that he was going to have.
I don't think Mike Pence really helped the ticket very much, but
well, that's a claim that's made in retrospect, not an argument about why Mike Pence was chosen. I think it was clear why Mike Pence was chosen. The same reason why Hillary Clinton picked Tim Kaine.
Who? I don't know who that is. Never heard of him.
The idea that Hillary Clinton's a woman, people are concerned about how women are making decisions at certain times of the moon.
That goes to show how idiosyncratic it is. She picked the most boring, forgettable person because of her ego. She can't be overshadowed.
No, I don't think that was it at all.
I think so.
I think that she picked someone who was not pro-choice, someone who was moderate, because she thought it would signal to the South and signal to some more conservative parts of the country that she was going to be okay. I'm not saying these are good choices. Obviously, she lost. But I think it's the same choice. Mike Pence, Tim Kaine, Joe Biden as VP, and Nikki Haley, and even Kamala Harris. Joe
Biden as VP made a certain amount of sense.
Yeah, because Barack Obama was black and nobody knew if he could do it. And the same thing with Hillary Clinton, the same thing with Joe Biden. I'm sorry, with Donald Trump. When there are these unknown outsider quantities that either because of demographic reasons or because of their youth or relative inexperience, people have questions about, you slot in the moderate, boring candidate that everyone knows can technically do the job. And I would argue that Nikki Haley fulfills those requirements in addition to bringing some genuine diversity.
In the history of the U.S., people, often the candidate would pick someone because regional, it mattered so much for the Electoral College is regional balance. So that used to be like the major,
Nikki Haley?
the other faction at the convention, right, is the Northerners versus Southerners or something. You have to throw them a bone. You pick someone regionally, but that has not been the case recently. Even though you would want maybe someone from Pennsylvania or someone from Michigan in order to theoretically appeal to voters there. It actually hasn't happened very much in recent elections. There's a lot of just picking. They pick who they get along with. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah. Well.
But and on that front, do these people get along with Nikki Haley?
I think that she's going out of her way to seem very inoffensive. And it's bland, and I agree that from a political perspective, she's charting a path that is appealing to very few in the public, but it's also a relatively inoffensive path. Apart from Don Lemon, nobody has a problem with Nikki Haley.
As long as we can get in the Don Lemon angle. More Rising right after this. Stay tuned.